If we pivot here and talk about the women's game, as you oversee the women's team as well, what are some of the biggest differences that you're looking to support compared to the men's game?
So this will be the first period of time where we have a nutritionist supporting the women's squad.
Mm-hmm.
So we've just had a person in place for maybe 2 months now. I would help as much as I could at the start of this season. And again, where I was just going to be temporarily, my focus is the first team. And it was kind of like, I will assist as much as I can. But it's, again, the funding in the women's game isn't equal to the men's, but also the income generation isn't equal. So you see why, but it's a case of looked at their match meal hotel menus, reviewing those. They aren't to the same standard. So what changes can we make and still not run away with ourselves in terms of budget? So tweaking things like that. And then we've had a nutritionist in place, and they found just the nutrition education for the women's is so much lower. And this guy, he's worked with top flight men's football.
Yep.
So he's seen the difference between both kind of groups. Yeah, their nutrition education isn't as high, but they've had minimal exposure. And like some of the players on the women's team are top flight women's players, but again, they've still just not had the nutrition support. So it is a lot more basic nutrition fundamentals, understanding what nutrients are in foods, food groups, looking at how we can get variety into the women's diets, looking at how we educate them on basic, again, fueling and recovery fundamentals within more limited time. The nutritionist is in at least 1 day a week, but again, I'm here full time. We're going to have next season, we'll have 3 nutritionists just with the first team.
Incredible.
Yeah, it's a massive, and again, the club is really invested in the nutrition provision, and we're trying to extend that into the women's game because we see there are differences in their kind of nutrition knowledge and dietary intakes. But again, because they've had limited exposure, they're like sponges when it comes to information. They
Compliance
ask
is high and they're ready to...
It's working with those athlete groups that are clamoring out for support and information. So in terms of engagement, they're probably a lot more engaged than the men's squad because they haven't had that kind of support before, whereas some of the men's players have probably had nutrition input from when they were 15, 16. And they've got 3 people around them supporting them from next season. So it's a very different environment from the men's and women's. But again, the club is really invested in supporting the women's program. They are now based on a training centre. They have their own facility within our site as well. The food provision is now all in-house. So again, we have a lot more control over what's being done. We have one of our chefs is dedicated for the women's team. She works across the overall training centre and the academy and the men's team as well. So she sees what is going on elsewhere and where she is able to take ideas from what we're doing our side and implement it with the women's squad as well. It's just exponentially. I think the women's team management would agree that in the last 6 months, they've just had massive amount of progression in terms of the support to them, not just from nutrition, across the board. Like I say, we built them a little mini training centre on our site now as well. They have their own training pitches. So it's massive improvement for the women's game here. And I think that just, again, evidences the club investment in their programme as well as supporting the men's team. I think everyone understands how important it is to improve provision for female athletes.
That's tremendous. It's great to see, that provision increasing. And as you said, we see this a lot with Olympic athletes, don't we, as well, who are not, the funding is only to a certain level and they're like sponges in the sense of wanting to have the support and what else can you do? And I like how, you're mentioning here all these sort of key fundamentals that we need to get in place before we get into any type of real, personalize or customize, because we've got so much to build on initially.
Yeah.
And again, if we transition to, end of season, you guys had a tremendous finish, obviously qualifying in the top four. As you go through the off season now and you start up thinking about the preseason for next year, if we think about lab testing, biomarkers, are there certain markers that you like to run or that are important for your program that you want to make sure are checked off the list?
Yeah, so when the guys return in, we'll have your usual screening day, and we'll do a blood assessment. So we'll run a nutrition panel within overall blood assessment, and there's a whole load of nutritional markers that we might be implementing that will dictate some of our menu planning. So because we do our individualized menu approach, when we see a guy is low in a particular nutrient, vitamin or mineral, we plan that into their menus. So if they're low on their zinc intake, how can we modify the foods that are going into that dish so that we're ensuring they have, they're meeting even basic RDA kind of guidelines. So we'll do a blood assessment panel, we'll do a body composition assessment. I'm not sure if we'll have our DEXA installed at that point. We're currently building a room for it, so
nice. Fingers
if
crossed.
we can, we'll get it in. But if not, we'll take that assessment possibly at the end of the preseason, maybe, and tie it into a kind of a timeline over like a start and end of preseason, mid-season, end of season sort of time scale. But if not, we'll do some of Skinfold assessment there. We have a group come in and they'll do some sweat testing on our guys as well. That then dictates they can have kind of prescription hydration tablets made up. So again, they'll have different kind of sodium quantities based on their overall sweat rates. So again, we try as much as possible when we do these broad assessments, how can we then make that actually count for something in that individual's program? So we do bloods, great, and we can supplement off the back of that, but also how do we build that into menus? The hydration testing, how can we make sure that is personalized for them as an individual? The Skinfold assessment, they all have been given targets to try and come back at the end of their off season. They are realistic, whilst also not being kind of too easy, because again, what is really important
too far off piece in the off season.
Yeah, exactly. Like we'll find a lot of athletes, not just the guys here, over my experience, we'll get guys that come in at a certain level at the end of an off season and they'll really improve, and then they'll just go straight back to where they were. Whereas I'm kind of like, no, let's improve year on year.
Yeah.
So don't come back in a holy show of a mess.
Let's get a little bit better when you come back this year, and then next year we can
bit by bit, especially with the younger guys, you have much more potential for
lot
that
of runway.
kind of progression. Yeah.